Welcome, foolish mortals, to another episode of Megler Makes. I am your hostess, your ghost hostess, and tonight we're going to be doing something a little different, combining my love of art and ghost stories. Since I don't want to frighten you prematurely, a few notes about the content. These urban legends and ghost stories, by their nature, will contain depictions of death, both accidental and on purpose, natural and unnatural. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, as they say, look alive, and we'll begin our little tour. There's no turning back now. All of the stories in tonight's episode come from the area where I grew up, the western suburbs of Chicago. Our first story comes from the upper middle-class town of Clarendon Hills. Just outside the town's business district, you'll find a sprawling wood-shingled building that's housed a local institution for decades, a bar and restaurant called Country House. Going back longer than the restaurant has been in business, the overgrown, cabin-like building has been rumored to be home to more than just drinks and a great cheeseburger. The first signs of not natural activity began in 1974 when the new owner was meeting in the restaurant with a contractor about renovations planned for the building. Their meeting came to an abrupt end when 6 of the manually operated window shutters opened on their own with a loud bang. When the men realized that neither was playing a prank on the other, the meeting was hastily rescheduled at another location. Like any good ghost story, if you ask 3 different people what the story behind the haunting activity at Country House is, you'll get 3 different answers. Most seem to agree that it has something to do with the girlfriend of one of the former bartenders. Before the current owners took over, so sometime in the 1970s, this young woman, who had a young child, came into the bar. She was obviously upset and asked the staff if she could leave the child there for a little while. When they refused, she left, taking the child with her. Not long after, she drove her car into a tree, causing a fatal collision that took both of their lives. It wasn't long before the staff at Country House started noticing strange things happening. When the building was empty, they would hear pounding on the walls and the sound of a child crying in another room. Rooms that had been closed smelled like fresh flowers. Footsteps could be heard after closing when all of the diners had gone. The women's restroom seemed to be a particular hub of activity, as staff and guests reported feelings of being watched or another person in the room with them, even though they knew it was empty. A spectral child has been seen playing in the hallways. Some servers have said they've seen a woman standing in one of the second-floor windows, beckoning to them. Country House has become something of a local hotspot on the ghost hunting scene over the years. It's been featured on the local news and turns up periodically on TV shows. Despite numerous reports of activity throughout the years, no conclusive evidence has ever been captured. Though the owners have had psychics and paranormal investigators out to consult, the mysterious ghost of Country House seems only to appear on her terms. Good for you, girl. Protect your boundaries. Country House is located in Clarendon Hills, Illinois, and is open most days for lunch and dinner. Next, we travel east along Interstate 290 to the town of Hillside, Illinois, where we find Queen of Heaven's Cemetery. Any cemetery is bound to have a multitude of ghost stories associated with it. Queen of Heaven, being the largest Catholic cemetery in Chicago, is no different. It's the final resting place of poets, politicians, professional wrestlers, and a large number of mobsters from Chicago's bad old days as a hotbed of organized crime. Each of these late luminaries has a story to tell, but none of these stories is as tragic as the supposed cause of Queen of Heaven's largest and best-known haunting activity. On December 1st, 1958, a Catholic school called Our Lady of the Angels caught fire and burned to the ground. 92 school children and 3 nuns were trapped inside and lost their lives. Though the Chicago Archdiocese built a new school building on the same site as Our Lady of the Angels, all of the haunting activity associated with the fire seems to have migrated to Queen of Heaven, where the victims of the fire were interred. Visitors to the cemetery have reported seeing bright lights bobbing up and down between the tombstones. Another hotspot of activity is the mass grave where many of the unidentifiable victims of the fire were buried. Visitors to the grave reported smelling smoke and feeling a burning sensation in their throats. Queen of Heaven Cemetery is also the location of one of the many appearances of the face of Jesus, this time in the bark of a tree. One regular visitor reports visions of the Virgin Mary every time they go to the cemetery. Except for Tuesdays. The Virgin Mother never appeared on Tuesdays. Maybe the Mother of God takes Tuesdays off. Queen of Heaven Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois is open daily from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. No tour of Chicago boneyards would be complete without a visit to the infamous Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. Not far from Queen of Heaven, in Midlothian, Illinois, Bachelor's Grove is a disused cemetery that is anything but abandoned. The tiny cemetery, which is the final home to fewer than 100 permanent residents, was used in burials between the 1840s and 1950s. Its secluded location proved ideal for clandestine activities. Everything from mob-era body dumps to, more commonly, teenage partying and vandalism has taken place among the graves. With any night of debauchery, tall tales are bound to emerge. Stories of a lady in white, black dogs, floating orbs, and even a Sasquatch-like forest-dwelling monster have all been told about the cemetery, surrounding woods and nearby pond. During the ghost hunting TV show boom of the mid-2010s, nearly every ghost bro with a camera crew spent at least a little time tramping through Bachelor's Grove. As with any of the ghost hunting shows, none of them ever produced much in the way of evidence of the great beyond. Even so, Bachelor's Grove was the shooting location for one of the most famous and most credible ghost photographs available. Also known as the Madonna of Bachelor's Grove, this woman in white was captured using an infrared camera and film, making fakery especially difficult. It's also not the only photograph of the same figure who's been seen in the cemetery off and on since at least 1979. Perhaps the strangest phenomena credited to Bachelor's Grove is one called the Disappearing House. This white, one-story Victorian appears near the grounds of the cemetery, but when visitors try to get close to it, it recedes back into the distance, eventually vanishing entirely. Like any good haunted house, the legend of the Disappearing House warns that if you do manage to reach it and enter, you'll never be able to leave. If you do plan to visit Bachelor's Grove, do so during the daylight hours, from dawn until dusk when it's open to the public. The spirits that walk there aren't the only dangerous things to be found within the cemetery. Uneven terrain, broken tombstones hidden in the overgrown grass, vandals, vagrants, and the heavy presence of the Midlothian police can all be found in Bachelor's Grove after dark. The last stop on tonight's tour of haunted Chicagoland is one most people will recognize. Maybe you've even been there. With almost 900 domestic and international flights leaving O'Hare International Airport on a daily basis, it's one of the busiest airports in the world. With so many people coming and going every day, it's almost expected that there should be some weird shit going on there. But O'Hare wasn't always a bustling hub of air travel. Hell, it wasn't even always O'Hare Airport. The Chicago Municipal Airport, as it was called when it first opened in 1926, was built to support Midway Airport, the busiest domestic airport in the U.S. at the time. O'Hare then served as a manufacturing plant for C-52 military transports during World War II, until it was renamed in 1949 after the U.S. Navy's first Medal of Honor recipient, Edward Butch O'Hare. And yes, before you ask, I am super fun at parties. After its renaming, O'Hare steadily increased its size and volume of civilian commercial air traffic. In the 1970s, it held the self-professed title of busiest airport in the world. But with the increase in traffic also came an increase in accidents, mishaps, and even catastrophes. Before long, O'Hare would be the site of one of the worst plane crashes in aviation history, which is said to be the source of the haunting activities that occur on the grounds and in the neighborhoods surrounding the airport. On May 25, 1979, right around 3 p.m., American Airlines Flight 191 took off from O'Hare International Airport bound for Los Angeles. As it taxied down the runway, the crew piloting the aircraft had nearly 50,000 flight hours between them. The aircraft itself, a DC-10 that was still relatively new for an airplane, at just 7 years old, had about 20,000 flight hours logged. It had even been in for routine maintenance a few months prior to this last short flight. As the airplane reached takeoff speed, the control tower reported seeing white vapor billowing from the aircraft. A moment later, the port side engine and pylon assembly tore free from the underside of the wing, flipped up over top of it, and tore off to land on the runway. Flight 191 continued climbing normally, missing engine notwithstanding. It reached a height of about 300 feet off the ground before banking sharply to the left and crashing into the field. The subsequent explosion there would claim the lives of 2 bystanders on the ground, the crew and all of the passengers on board. 269 people in all perished. The cause of the crash would later be determined to be small cracks in the engine and pylon mountings caused by the improper execution of routine maintenance. These cracks went unnoticed for several months, quietly expanding until the fateful afternoon in May of 1979. Stories of strange occurrences in and near the crash site began almost immediately. Motorists driving past the field where the crash took place reported seeing odd white lights bobbing across the otherwise empty field. Residents of a nearby mobile home park reported hearing knocks and rapping on the sides of their trailers and windows with no one around when owners went out to investigate. Dogs barked relentlessly at the empty field. Other residents reported footsteps approaching their homes and even doorknobs being jiggled, again by no one the living could see. On several occasions, residents reported opening their doors to a worried person who would tell them they had to collect luggage or make a connecting flight, only to vanish seconds later. One resident, who had taken his dog for an evening walk in the field some years after the disaster, reported encountering a young man who told him he needed to make an emergency call. The dog walker said the young man smelled of gasoline and had smoke as if he were on fire, drifting off of his clothes. The man turned away from the younger man to point out a nearby payphone, and when he turned back, he found he was alone in the field. Adding insult to fatal injury, it took 32 years and the fundraising efforts of the 6th grade class of Decatur Classical School in Chicago to finally install a memorial to the victims of Flight 191. This 2-foot-high wall, made of interlocking bricks, each bearing the name of one of the crash victims, was erected on the south shore of Lake Opeka, about 2 miles away from the crash site, by the northeast corner of Lee and Toohey Avenue. The crash site itself was redeveloped in 2021 and has been named the future site of an interchange for Interstate Highway 90. Perhaps these restless spirits will finally be able to get to Los Angeles after all. I hope you enjoyed these tales of my old stomping grounds and some of the ghosts that still roam there. If you did and want to hear more stories of the not natural while I make stuff, subscribe to the channel and hit ye olde like button to let me know. As always, I hope you have a lovely evening and thank you for spending part of it with me. Until next time, stay spooky.